Well, welcome and thank you for watching. This is the London system versus Santiago 850 Game 1. Right below here is the template for the London system that we follow. We're working our way up the chess.com bot ratings ladder. Santiago 850, let's begin. The London opens with d4. Santiago responds with d5, bishop to f4, and the e6 move of Santiago. Now, this is a scenario from our opponent that we're going to see on a regular basis as we move on up into the intermediate bots, and that is this d5 e6 move that opens up the diagonal for both the dark squared bishop and the queen to begin to target the king. We've seen in previous games that we've played how to deal with both of these scenarios. So if you are, for the first time watching SST chess development, and you're starting with this particular game at Santiago 850, and you're not familiar with what I just said in these attacking lines and how to deal with them, please go back to the other bots and other games that we have taken on previously, Jimmy 600 and Mina 700 and some of those lower rated ones in which we deal with these scenarios, because I'm not going to talk about these extensively as we continue on up, because we need to develop even greater skills and tactics in dealing with some of the more advanced moves and all of these moves, and how to deal with the queen coming down to the h4 square, the bishop coming down to the b4 square. We already know how to deal with those, so refer to those previous videos. So we're going to continue in our development with e3, once again providing protection for both the bishop and the pawn. Santiago responds with knight to f6. We'll continue our development, knight to f3. Santiago comes with the dark square bishop to d6. Now this is a tactic that is continually used as we move into the intermediate bots, and that is the dark square bishop of our opponent coming forward and challenging our dark square bishop. So we really have two primary responses to this. One is we could certainly engage, attack, and the usual response of black is to take with the queen and move into the d6 square, developing the queen. The other alternative that we have is to move back to the g3 square, having been protected by these two pawns at f and h2. And in this particular game, I chose to move back. And one scenario that can occur through this is if we are taken and captured here at the g3 square, we will take with the h2 pawn. Why do we do that? So that we can open up this h-file for our rook should the king castle to the king's side, which once again is one of the primary attacking goals of the London, is the king castling to the king's side and then utilizing the attacking lanes of the London for that. And sure enough, in this game, the king castled to king's side. So again, if we're taken here, we'll take with the h-pawn so that we can eventually utilize this corridor along the h-file in order to checkmate the king, which we will see later on this game actually occurs. So we'll continue with our development of bishop to d3. Santiago responds with a6. We'll continue by moving our b knight to d2. Santiago responds by moving his knight back to the d7 square, and we'll finish out the London development with c3. So we'll let the Santiago move his queen over to e8, and then again at this point pause for a moment and look at the attacking lines, familiarize yourself with these. Certainly we are at liberty to take here. We'd probably be taken back with the c pawn. We have this diagonal from the light square bishop attacking the h7 square. And again, if this corridor opens up For the rook, we have a wonderful scenario here of an intersection between the rook and the light square bishop. We have the e5 square for the knight to move into. So just again, familiarizing yourself with the lines of attack for the London. Again, moving the knight to e5 opens up the light square diagonal for our queen, especially now that the king is on the g7 or g8 square, having castled. So we're going to move our knight to the e5 square. We do have the understanding that if we're taken, we can get into an exchange here. That's fine. We will take that chance, but I certainly want to begin to open up the corridor of this light square diagonal for my queen. One of the easiest ways to do that is to move to the strategic e5 square. Santiago responds by moving his queen back to d8, and this is a tactic that we haven't seen yet, and I haven't deployed yet in our games, and that is taking the knight at d2 and moving it in the place of where the knight was at f3, thereby lending more support to this knight. But we also have attacking lines as well that we can employ later on in this game, and we'll see those utilized as we move forward in the next couple of moves. But this is something to remember, especially after the king has castled to the king's side. For our opponents, this is a good strategic move, especially since we have the protection of the c3 pawn, protecting against the bishop coming down here. We also still have the rook on this side of the board, as well as the queen in case of an attack on the weak side there. So Santiago responds by coming up to d6. And I'm going to begin pushing this h-pawn forward to try and break through this defensive pawn structure here. I've shared in previous videos about the value of both the h-pawn and the g-pawn to begin to move forward once the king, again, has castled to the king's side, in breaking up these defensive pawns here. And so we're going to begin to utilize that tactic. Move the pawn, the h-pawn, up to h4, and eventually we'll move on up to h5. Santiago responds with the knight moving to f6, probably lends support in case we do actually move to the h5 square with the pawn. My next move was to look at really this, let me go back here, to look at the opening of this diagonal. Because the g-pawn moved up to g6, this diagonal targeting potentially the rook at f8, I can easily just kind of maneuver my dark square bishop there and put pressure. So that's something that I'm looking at, but also for my dark square bishop to get into a better attacking position. This was very limited here, really only going one way. So now I can attack in this direction, and hopefully at this point you're seeing 2 points of attack for the dark square bishop. If not, why don't you pause the video at this point and see if you can see these and the value of that. Okay, well, 2 of these obviously are coming to the g5 square, pinning the knight to the queen, and then ultimately also coming to the h6 square and targeting the rook. So these are good high-value targets that we can utilize the dark square bishop to attack. The queen moves along the dark square diagonal, not relieving the pressure, the potential of this move. So we're going to take advantage of that. We'll move the bishop to g5, pinning the knight to the queen. And now we're just gaining in strength in our development. And really at this point, our opponent is on the defensive. There's not much that they can do right now. So we just have to make sure that our moves are consistent and We don't get eager to move something before we need to lay a foundation for the attack. We just methodically go through and whittle away at the defensive forces of our opponent. Santiago moves the B knight to B5, and we're just going to push our H pawn on up, wanting to create some kind of conflict and encounter here. And again, all for the purpose of opening up the H file for our rook. Santiago responds with another pawn move to C5. Let's go ahead and do that. And we're really forcing our opponent to make a decision about this pawn. So Santiago chooses the F pawn to take. And now we are in a position where if we want to, we could move to this square, attack. We can keep the pressure here. But there was a move that I wanted to make concerning this knight in order to kind of get it out of the way so that I can begin to have some leeway with my queen along the light square diagonal. So I chose to move the knight to the H4 square, and in so doing, I now have a double target on the pawn at G6 for possibility of opening that up. Because if I were to attack, this pawn could respond, and now I do have this whole corridor, the H file, open. And now, by moving this knight over to the H4 square, I now have the light square diagonal for my queen. So Santiago chooses to move the rook to safety at D8. And now I am looking at this square at G6 as a possibility to attack. I have three ways in which to do that now. So I could do it with the light square bishop along this diagonal. I really want to save this for later development if I need it. I could take with the knight at E5, but that opens up this corridor for the bishop. I really don't want to open up the gate for some kind of future attack, especially with the opponent's queen so close, in that. So I chose to take with the H4 knight. So Santiago responds by moving the queen over to G7. And I see an opportunity here to take with the dark square bishop this knight and fork the queen and the rook, but there's no backup. There's no protection for that bishop should I move there to that square. So let's get the queen involved at F3, giving support and lending support to this, and then see where we go from here. So Santiago responds by taking the knight with the H pawn, and now the H file is fully open to our rook, which was kind of one of our goals. But now also we have this move, the dark square bishop taking the knight, and now both of these pieces are forked, and Santiago is going to lose one of those. So unfortunately, Santiago chooses to move to A5. I'm not sure there's really a whole lot that Santiago can do at this point to prevent the checkmate that is coming. But certainly we're going to take the queen. Again, the king is really not in a position to take this, because if he does, it's, I believe, a one-move checkmate, because we have these squares taken that would be protected. That'd be a one-move checkmate. So the king cannot come up and take the bishop. So he moves his rook to A7, kind of lending support along the 7th rank here. But this is an easy maneuver for us. We'll just move our dark square bishop back, and again, targeting this rook and providing pressure there. Again, we still have this corridor wide open. We have the queen that can come here and come on down as well. A lot of possibilities right now for us. Santiago responds by taking the knight at e5. And of course, now, once again, I have some decisions to make. I can take with the pawn, take with the dark square bishop, go down and take the rook here. And those are all viable alternatives. However, there is something that a move that I believe is more prevalent, and that is to bring the rook on down to the h8 square and put the king in check. And that's what I chose to do. I'm protected by the dark square bishop here at f6. And now, having cut off these squares, the king only has one square in which to move, and that is at f7. So the king moves to f7. Now, if you can see what I see right now and saw during the game, it's a familiar scenario that we've seen, and that is pinning one of our own pieces to either the opponent's queen or king, and it is our move. So we can look at this going, okay, I can take the bishop, I could take the rook, but as soon as I move that bishop, the king is going to be in check and is going to have to deal with that. So I chose to take the more valued piece, the rook, and now we have instantaneous check upon the king, and the king is in a world of hurt because there are not very many squares. In fact, there's only one square that the king can move to, and that is here to g7. And once he does, well, he's going to try and delay this, which is an easy take. And once the king moves, it's either moving the queen to this square or to this square, and the game is over, and that is game, set, and match, checkmate. So once again, seeing the value and power of the London, and even the power of, attacking with these pawns and opening up this corridor for the rook, proved once again to be significant in attacking our opponent. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. We're going to move on to the second game with Santiago 850. Hope to see you then.